Welcome back to Navigate New York. I'm so excited to introduce season 5, and this season is just filled with incredible guests that I'm so grateful that I get to sit down and interview. I'm also so grateful to be sponsored this season by Amvoy Wealth. Amvoy Wealth is a cross-border financial firm who specialise in assisting Irish individuals moving to, living in, or returning from the United States. So Amvoy Wealth are uniquely positioned to help you if you have financial interests in both Ireland and the US. You can find out more at amvoywealth.com. I'll leave their link in the show notes, and I'm so delighted to be partnering with Amvoy Wealth for season 5 of Navigate New York. We'll get started. Fiona McEntee, thank you so much for being a guest on Navigate New York.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
Oh my God. I feel like this has been a while in the making. Like, I've wanted to have this episode with you, and seeing all of the amazing work you've done with McEntee Law and all of the free resources you provide for people is incredible. So thanks so much for making the time. You're a busy woman.
Well, as are you, Sophie. It takes one to know one. And no, truly, I'm based in Chicago, but I feel like I have a lot of connection to New York. So I feel extra special that you asked me to be on your show.
Yeah, you're my first out-of-state guest on Navigate New York. So,
wow! Oh my gosh, double! I didn't even know that is an extra honor. So hopefully, we'll give people a good conversation, and maybe the first of more, perhaps.
Yes, oh, absolutely. I feel like I could personally learn so much from you on the visa process, and our listeners are always wondering and looking for answers on visas, like we all are. So absolutely, I think the more kind of clarity we can get and sharing the knowledge and information is the best thing, and really the aim of the podcast. So but before we start about McEntee Law and your role as an immigration attorney and everything you have built in the States, I wanted to go back to your life before you moved to America. What was it like at home? Where are you from, and what brought you over to the States?
Yeah, so I grew up in Dublin, very proud Dub, and I went to college in UCD. And during my year, one of the reasons I went to UCD to study law was because of the opportunity to study abroad. So I had that in my head that I wanted to study abroad. And in my third year, it was the third year, we had the opportunity to study, to pick somewhere to go. And anyway, long story short, because there was a couple of, ups and downs, I originally wanted to go to Australia, actually, and they picked me to go to Chicago. And initially I was like a little devastated. But my friend who'd studied abroad in Norway or Denmark, somewhere in Scandinavia, he said that he went through his study abroad where he barely saw sunlight. He's like, if you don't go to Chicago, like, this is ridiculous. So I came around and came to Chicago for a year, and honestly, pretty soon after I arrived, fell in love with it. Probably like how you and a lot of other people feel about when you arrive in New York. I just felt like there was something really special, and it just felt right for me. So I did the year, went back to UCD, graduated with my bachelor's degree, and then came out and did a Juris Doctor, which is a professional law degree here, in 2 years. And so that is kind of how it all started.
Wow. How would you describe Chicago for anyone who hasn't been? Like, what's it like as a city?
I'm obviously very biased, and I want to frame this, by the way, in recognizing the privileged position that I am in. I am a white Irish immigrant, an educated Irish immigrant coming to a city that is so friendly to Irish in particular. So I always think it's important that we put that lens on our experience, and that maybe not everybody gets that kind of, I think, the welcome of the Irish, right? So it's an added special welcome being Irish in Chicago, but it is a phenomenal city. It has a lot of, one of the things that struck me, right, in Chicago was you can be on Lakeshore Drive, which is like the highway, right? And just off to the side is like the path where you can cycle your bike. People are all exercising. And then just beyond is the beach and the lake. And then to the other side is the zoo. And then you look up and you see the skyline. And it's just like the juxtaposition of like all these incredible things, like right in the one spot. So it's a beautiful city. It's a very friendly city. It's a very progressive city. You know, it's not without its flaws, but I feel like Chicago welcomed me, and it felt pretty quickly. It felt like my new adopted home.
Oh, that's such a great description of Chicago. And my husband lived in Chicago for a year, and he still just talks about it being such a warm place. And anyone I know who's now in New York, who once lived in Chicago, have such wonderful things to say about it. And I think it's in the lens of our listeners who, you know, are really a lot of the younger kind of people who follow me on Navigate New York are eager to come to New York City as a graduate, or maybe they've missed the graduate opportunity, and we can get into those sort of visa options. But I also sort of feel like, we forget about the other amazing cities in America, like Chicago, like Boston, like Philadelphia, Washington, and then the southern states as well. There's all of these really amazing places that might feel, you know, you're well used to New York, Fiona, and how competitive and every big city is, but specifically New York, and to find jobs here. Do you find that, would you give advice to someone young maybe to kind of consider, if they're crazy about coming to New York, just to consider some of those other cities in terms of getting employment and finding your feet?
Yeah, I absolutely would. And I think as far as like a transition from Ireland, like even from Dublin, right, it's still a big, going from a city to a capital city to like a big city here, right? Still a big transition. But Chicago, the interesting thing about Chicago is that there's a lot of kind of Midwestern transplants in Chicago. So if you think about all the states that are surrounding us, like Wisconsin and, you know, Ohio, Indiana, like a lot of people from those neighboring states come to Chicago. So it has a very Midwestern kind of welcoming, you know, small what I think, I don't know, this may be not even attributed to Chicago, but it's like America's biggest like small town, you know, it's that kind of vibe, right? And so you do definitely get that, where it seems a lot more intimate than New York and you do the US, but it's just in a different kind of scale. So I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think in general, for people to think outside of maybe some of the traditional places that they might have thought about, absolutely makes sense. There's a great Irish community here that is really deep rooted. And I have found that you know, people have been so welcoming and willing to make intros. And I mean, there's a man I know who's a lawyer here, Kevin O'Reilly, right? I met him when I went to law school here. One of the first days through the alumni reception, he came back and I met him, and we've been great friends ever since. And he's introduced me to a whole host of other Irish American lawyers and it's judges and like just a big network of people. And I think people could do far worse than think of Chicago as a place to go.
Amazing. Well, you're selling Chicago really well. I was in Chicago before for the North Americans for the GAA in the summer, and it was amazing. Like the GAA community is obviously huge there as well, which I think we're so lucky to have all around the US. But Fiona, before we even go into I feel like when I start asking you about visas, you're at work and you have to, go into answer mode. But I'm really interested to hear how you built your business in Chicago and how you went from being this sort of fresh out of university graduate with your master's to building McEntee Law. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I guess this starts also back at home. I've told this story before, but my dad's nickname for me since I was a kid was Save the Whales, because I was this very just like advocating for the underdog or the rights of like just different, the union and this and that. And, so it wasn't really a surprise that I ended up in immigration. I was thinking something social justice, but back in Ireland in 2000s, right, immigration wasn't an option to study. So it was only when I moved to the US that I discovered it. So in law school, then I started focusing in on immigration. And this is back in like 2005. And I worked in multiple immigration clinics in law school, took 2 long immigration courses. I left after that time period knowing that I wanted to go into immigration. And so when I finished law school, I took the bar exam and I got hired in a very high volume immigration practice in 2007. And, been working, it's like, I feel like I sound so old when I say it's like almost been close to 20 years since I've been working in the field. It's like, what? How could that be possible? But but the firm that I trained in, when I got hired there, one of the attorneys explained to me that 1 year of practicing there was equivalent to maybe 7 years of practicing in a different firm because of the high volume nature. They had this online platform where basically all day long we would be getting obscure questions from HR representatives from Fortune 100 companies. So I had huge exposure there. I also went and pitched for the work for a professional hockey team as the attorney. I was sent to go with somebody else in the team and we won that contract. So I became their lead attorney there. And so I handled like the sports, immigration and any music stuff. So after working there for quite a few years, I felt that I did have a lot of experience and I just gotten married and was looking to make a change. And then I branched out on my own and the rest is history.
Amazing. It's so good to hear that. And like, I love the way you're saying, you're like, the rest is history. But obviously you've had and have this incredibly like deep passion for what you do. And I want to just jump back to when you said your dad has said that you would want to save the whales and always be there for the underdog. And I think it's it is such a brave way to be as a person, is to be willing to fight for what's right. And I definitely found moving to the US, activism, I suppose, because I'm from a very rural part of Ireland, I was in Belfast for college, but there wasn't a lot of activism. I obviously studied, the Troubles, and I was always really inspired by activism. But for you to then, be kind of thrown into the deep end in the US and this high pace environment and seeing obviously you'd studied immigration, but to see how bad, for want of a better word, things had been here in the US and still, are very, very challenging. What do you think, it is about immigration that, keeps you like so engaged in your work, and does that work ever get, I can imagine it takes a big toll on you personally.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think we do need to acknowledge that there can be some kind of secondary trauma that attorneys feel from, depending on the type of work that you do, and obviously the clients themselves, right? It just depends on what types of cases you're working on. So it's very important that we have solidarity amongst our bar association, which is incredible, AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, access to like mental health services, therapy. Our team all has access to therapy through this cool, it's like a UK-based startup that provides that. And so they can have confidential things. And it's all about normalizing that kind of stuff, because I do think we need to acknowledge that. And, throughout the course of my career, I've done a lot of what I would call crisis lawyer, and know that was going to happen, right? And it all started with the Trump administration, with the Muslim ban, when there's a partner in the firm. He moved out later to join me in the firm, and we've grown the practice together. It's doing a lot of kind of on the ground crisis stuff. We were very heavily involved with pro bono cases with people fleeing Afghanistan, which was absolutely horrific stuff, like humanitarian that was just awful stuff, and awful for the clients involved as well. And so, it's not an easy area of law to practice in, because the stakes are very, very high. And we know personally that it's life-changing for people. Literally, it can be life or death. We just got an asylum case approved for a family that now don't have to go back to Russia, right? And it's like, it's transformational. And even, that's obviously the extreme life or death situations, but we can see how transformational it can be. I love when we get to see, and sometimes we have personal relationships with our clients, right, as well. And to see, leave when they have the opportunity to be here. I'll share just like a tiny personal story that just happened last week. My daughter broke her arm on last week, right? And we have been working with this incredible startup for years that has developed a new way of putting casts on. It's a whole waterproof cast model, right? It's like disrupting the traditional cast that's been around for like God knows how long, right? And so when Rose broke her arm, I immediately was like, can we get in touch with Cast 21, right? The CEO, who is just this woman, she's just incredible. So we got in touch with her. She immediately was in touch with us. And anyway, long story short, yesterday, my daughter got the waterproof Cast 21 on her arm. And it's just incredible because, you know, like working with that company from the start and now seeing, like, I was in the doctor's office as they were putting the cast on her arm and I was like, oh, like this is just a full circle moment for me to be able, and that's the literal fruits of the labor that we do, right? To have a small part in working with somebody who was able to create this thing. And so ultimately the pros totally outweigh the cons of immigration. And I think a lot of us feel that way. So that's how you're able to do the work on the really hard days, because of kind of things like that.
Amazing. That's so inspirational to hear that, Fiona, because whenever there is a sort of big news story on immigration, I remember when Trump got elected, you know, there was so much fear for Irish immigrants. Even though we have so many more opportunities than other nationalities in this country, but we also have the worry of our undocumented, like every culture group does. And I would always sort of find myself navigating my way to your page or your social medias to see where you were with it, and you're consistently providing, you know, support, guidance. You do a lot of free work as well in terms of the resources that you provide people with your like Zoom calls and Instagram lives and things like that, which I just think we cannot be educated enough on this stuff when you are an immigrant in another country, or if you're interested in moving to another country. So I just wanted to mention like how much you are noticed and how grateful we are for all of that work that you do behind the scenes. And I think personally, whenever I moved to the US as a graduate, and I worked with a brilliant immigration attorney here in New York who's Irish, and that's Lorgan. I had him on the podcast before. He does, again, so much for the Irish here and volunteers is on the board of the Irish Immigration Centre. But I sort of had this tunnel vision that like this lawyer takes care of me and he has nothing else. He doesn't work with other culture groups. Like, he's just an Irish immigration attorney. And I feel like it's an important thing to kind of flag for people who are in the US and maybe on a temporary work visa, that you have so much of the onus of the responsibility is on you as the immigrant and figuring out your options. And I feel like, you know, you've just told incredible stories about helping asylum seekers and helping, like, I'm sure your list of clients is just never ending. So what is it that, I guess my first question when it comes to visas that I'd like to ask is, for anyone who is considering, first off, moving to the US from Ireland, what is a sort of general piece of advice you would give them if, you know, for instance, they maybe haven't got the graduate visa, or they missed that window, which is obviously our first port of call? What's your sort of overarching advice to someone who's keen to move to the US to work?
Okay, so that's a great question. And thank you for noting all that resources. The reason I do that is because I feel like I didn't have these available to me when I was in that position. And I wish, you know, some of the institutional knowledge that I've built up over the years, like, I want to share, because I wish I had access to that. And like, I sound like a granny, but I'm just like, the internet wasn't what, you know, it just, these platforms weren't really around then either, access to information now than there was back then. So that, okay, what would I do if I was in a spot is I would be resourceful myself. And that's just a tip in life. Like, you can get really far by having initiative and being resourceful. So what that looks like would be, you know, getting information from reputable sources, right? You know, there's a lot of noise out there, and some of it is accurate, some of it is not. But do your own research initially. I would also like consider the source, right? So don't rely on some random blog for something that's going to be applicable to you, right? I've written an ebook that I can give people a complimentary copy of. It's more for startup founders, but it's a general overview of a lot of different immigration options. So I'd be happy to share a link if you want to share that with listeners for that. But really, there's no substitute for getting direct legal advice for your situation. And I'll give you a little example about this. I spoke to two Irish guys. They like shared a half an hour consult. They both jumped on, totally fine. I was happy enough to chat with them because they were in a kind of similar spot. And they were both in their masters, right? And they were mid-masters, but they were looking to graduate next year. And they were kind of saying, what are my options? And I first was like, wow, you're streets ahead. The fact that you're already being this proactive and that they found me through Instagram, that they booked a consult, that they shared the consult, which I thought was like, why not? You know, we sat down and we went through, they have some connections in the US. They were already thinking about what they could tap into as far as their network. And we went through a whole load of like individual immigration options for them. And as it turns out, there's an option that I would love to share with people that I don't really feel gets the press that it should. And even some immigration attorneys are not really aware of this option. And I am so zealous when it comes to like leave no stone unturned. Like I am like, what? Because I, again, know what it would feel like to be in that position. So I suggested this option to them. It's a J1 research visa. It's called a J1 research scholar, right? So there's loads of different types of J1s. The Irish work and travel one which is the grad visa. That's a version of the intern. There's the trainee. There's the summer J1. There's like an au pair. There's loads of different types of J1s. There is a J1 research scholar visa that historically has been used in more traditional research sense. But the Biden administration has created a whole series of policies towards attracting more STEM professionals in the US. And part of this expanded policy has been to promote this option in private businesses as opposed to like a university or like a pharma. You know, it's the expansion of this. So it's a very accessible option and it can be up to 5 years in duration. Wow. So, I mean, I would not be snoozing on that. I would be, if you had a toss-up of the J1 graduate visa or a 5-year J visa, you know, you may forego the graduate visa and look at the 5-year one. Now, you still need an employer. So there are some different requirements. But like me getting them, these two guys getting this information now in advance of graduating next May, like they're giving themselves the best shot. And that kind of shows you how getting this tailor-made advice and being resourceful, it's like a combo of all of this can put you in the best spot to have the most successful outcome. You can't guarantee it, but you're certainly giving yourself a good bit of a head start.
Absolutely. Fiona, firstly, very excited to see your handbook and thank you so much, or your ebook, for sharing for giving us that link, which I'll share for sure. Like that is knowledge that you just can't buy because I'm sure it's summarized in such a digestible way. And again, I cannot agree more with what you're saying about being resourceful, because that was kind of what I was hinting at with my first year here. I was kind of like walking around in this bubble, and then I was like, oh shit, I actually want to stay here, and what are my visa options? And we feel, and I don't know why it is, it's probably because when you're young and at home, you don't ever think you'll need an attorney and sort of feel like it might be a bit of a commodity. But like, to get things done right, if you really have ambition and you want to stay here long term, there's no way you can do it I personally think, without this legal advice. So absolutely agree with that. This J1 visa sounds incredible. So thank you for that tip. And then I also just, as we sort of talk about the various visa options, I would love to get your sort of opinion on, or how you would explain this. Like, so I get some people saying, like, I just want to come to the US and work, like, can I just get a visa sponsored? And I always say, it's not like Canada, it's not like Australia. No. Sadly, you can't just buy a visa, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like that. And I think they're the two kind of countries that I would give as an example to people. And so I think it's how I tend to set the tone for the conversation is for people to be aware that the immigration laws in the US haven't changed in over 30 years. So that's Congress creating immigration laws, right? I mean, that could be older than some of your listeners, right? And it's not older than me, but it's older than like, you know, than some of them. But then you say, but how, you mentioned this new J1 researcher, how is that if the laws haven't changed? Well, that's a policy change that can change from administration to administration. And that's why with the Trump administration, with the Biden-Harris administration, with the Obama administration, we see such sweeping changes because they're done at the executive level by the president, which they can do with certain parts of immigration, but they can't create new laws, right? So they can expand the policy. So it's not like Canada or even the UK or Australia, where they're modernizing their laws. So we are stuck in this time warp, right? So it means that the options that are more modern and accessible are not available here. People do ask me that, well, can't I just get a visa? I say, even if you have an employer, even if the employer can't find someone in the US, even if you have all the skills, even if you're checking all the boxes, even then you may not find an option that will work for you. Part of what we do in my job, if people could see a window into my brain, it would be like I'm doing a process of elimination. I'm going through I'm thinking of all the letters of the visa in the alphabet soup of options, A, B, C, you know, kind of going through them all, and I'm narrowing it down. And even within J, right, there's about 10 different types of J visas, and I'm trying to like do this analysis and figure out, and then I end up with, you know, maybe a couple, right? Maybe three, maybe one. It just really depends. But they're all, for the most part, we're in the employment-based realm here, and they're employer-sponsored, and they're very specific to the terms of that employment. And so while you may be able to sometimes transfer a visa, it does require something to be done. You don't just get a blank visa where you can come in and you know, do whatever you want for any type of employer. Unfortunately, that is not the land in which we are living.
Like, I couldn't ask you to have explained it better, so thank you so much. We have, it's funny that your story, I think it is important to give examples, and I think an example I can give in terms of some of our J1 listeners is our graduate or people considering a graduate visa for a year, is that like, it's everyone on that visa, you feel you've only just sort of scratched the surface and you really want to stay longer. And there's many of us in the community, including yourself, who want to get that visa to be longer and extend it. And obviously these things just take so much time and work and are done at such a senior level. So one person who's come on a grad visa who helps me with a lot of my social media stuff, from the moment she got here, she networked her butt off, and she made, you know, got her job, got her offer, did the job, has also been sort of freelancing as well, additionally getting contacts and experience in social media. She's already creating her portfolio to apply for the O1. And again, I just think, you know, that what you said earlier about being resourceful, educating yourself, this, you know, your guide that I'll be able to share with people in terms of, okay, I've got the grad visa, or I've missed the grad visa, I want to get to the US. You need to know, even if you're having a consultation with yourself, Fiona, that person, you have 30 minutes. So you need to, as the person, the candidate needs to know it for you to be able to help them what it is that they are eligible for. So I think that is so important.
Yeah, and that's, do you know what? You just hit the nail on the head there. That's actually right. Why I wrote, one of the main reasons I wrote my ebook was because I felt that I was spending a lot of the time explaining like the fundamental immigration system and options. Rather than what I would prefer to do is, if people have this like baseline understanding, I can get straight into applying the criteria to that person's situation. So I can say, okay, the O1 that you read about, and I'm working on a new ebook actually for people in the O1B, specifically for content creators, influencers, people in the creative realm. So when that's available, I'll share that too. It'll be a while because I'm a little bit. But, you know, at least that way, though, you have that baseline understanding, and your attorney doesn't necessarily have to spend the whole time going over, well, this is the E2, this is the L. You know, if you have a fundamental understanding, again, you're not going to have an intricate like knowledge of them, but if you just have an overview, it'll give yourself the best shot. And another thing with immigration is, very rarely can you have like too much time? Can you be like too early to be considering this, you know? So like there's, no time like the present. Like those two guys that are in there, they still have a year left in college. Like the person that you mentioned who just got there on the graduate visa, before you even get to the US, there's things that you can do. And so while we can't necessarily come up with a concrete option if you don't have an employer, the fine pieces of the puzzle might need to be slotted in there. But, you can certainly give yourself the best shot by getting started early as well.
Brilliant. I know I'm just, I think what you've said there as well about the reason that you made the ebook is to explain some of those fundamental things, because recently I met a friend who is in New York who has like 150,000 followers on Instagram and would love to come here. And I said, oh my God, you would totally be eligible for the O1. And she was like, what is that? And like, yeah, we kind of absorb it because we're here in the US, but there's so many people who just have no idea. And I understand why, because it's not just this person lived in Australia before, so she just sort of thought that you could pay for a work permit, which you just can't do here. So that's brilliant. I wanted to also ask you about, there's a lot of what I always find, especially when you're new to New York or new to the United States, is you'll hear like hearsay. So like people will say, oh, my cousin did this and it didn't work out. And And then we obviously have established, and you were a great part of it a few months ago, the Graduate Gateway, which is a resource for Irish graduates coming to New York specifically, but it can be applied to places anywhere else. So there are more resources like that. And before we move on from the J1 grad, I just wanted to see, was there any advice you felt you should share or could share with J1 grads in terms of what they should be aware of in finding employment, and what your experience has been with, those? I know you've hired interns and you support young Irish coming out as well. Yeah,
I have. I think, start the job hunt before you even get on that plane, right? That would be my tip, would be to, don't wait until you get there to start. And like, it's great. You're on for the first bit, you're going to be like overwhelmed and just so excited. But like, there is a clock ticking. You need to get a job. So, there will be plenty of time, hopefully, to enjoy the city and do all that other stuff. But like your number one priority needs to be getting that job and making sure that, a couple of things. The J1, you need to go into your interview knowing that the J1 is a temporary visa. If anybody suspects that you're trying to use this to stay on in the US, that is going to be trouble for you. So it is absolutely a temporary visa that you're just going to come here on and then go back, right? And if things change later, things can change later, but you shouldn't go in with the intention of that being your plan. And I would say LinkedIn, right? Think about who you might. I will often get messages on LinkedIn, and I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. But the non-generic ones will stick out to you. And I think that, and like another thing is, there's nothing I hate more than a generic cover letter that I can now tell has been written by ChatGPT. I'm a big, big fan of cover letters, and I have written and spoken about this quite a bit, because to me, they are so critical. And you need to personalize them to the company. If you can find something about the company's core values, I think often people will hire for someone who complements their culture internally, as opposed to if you are a relatively recent graduate, you're not going to have all the skills in the world. So, you need to maybe think about how you can align some of your core values with the company that you're applying for as well, and try to frame it and what you're going to bring to the table to complement their business. So, and that would be another tip. But start all that networking if you can before you even get on the plane to come to the US.
Brilliant advice. Brilliant advice. Thank you so much. I agree so much. I also think there is no AI tool that can outweigh your communication with a person who can help. And I said this recently on a podcast, that when you are communicating with someone, whether it be on LinkedIn before you arrive or at an event when you arrive in the US, treat every person the way you want to be treated. Like, treat every contact like you would treat the CEO. Sell yourself, a pitch, show respect. They will help you. And I always want to say that it's different here in the States, because there's so much growth in companies and business just happens so quickly here. There might not be a marketing internship this week in a company. In 2 weeks, they could have a whole new division and need 10 marketing interns. So just that, make those strong connections and don't, think, oh, they're not hiring at the minute, I'll just leave them alone. Just kind of, be active and volunteer your time. And as you say, be key about your messaging. Like, I'm really eager to gain experience and I can learn so much because your company does X, Y, and Z. So I think that's really, really valuable advice. And Fiona, I did put out on Instagram a few questions, asked if anyone had questions. So I'm going to ask you a few of them. Obviously, we won't get through them all, but some are really good and ones that they're all really good, but some I'm particularly interested in as well. So the E3 visa, has there been any progress?
It's like my third baby. There has been a lot of work. Right? Some of us have been working on this for a decade or more. There's 2 bills that are pending right now. There's nothing, I don't know when the episode's going to air, but there's going to be the Democratic National, the convention's going to be here in Chicago. Both of these bills are, I believe they both have a Republican co-sponsor as well. So in theory, it should be a bipartisan thing. It's not for the want of trying that we don't have this passed, but it's still ongoing. Believe me, people always email me about this. When this happens, I'm not going to say if, because I'm very optimistic. When this happens, we will be shouting from the rooftop. It's still TBD at the moment.
And that is the visa, just to explain that. Australia, am I right in saying this?
Yes, correct. Yeah. This actually came through discussions that we had because we run the pro bono clinic through the Irish Immigration Centre here and have been involved in meeting with members of the Irish government. And I was saying, there is a precedent for other countries having their own professional visa with the US. So it's not like we're trying to do something that other countries don't have. Like Ireland would be looking to get the surplus of the E3s that Australia has right now. Chile and kind of treaty with the US that creates a visa for citizens of those countries. And then Canada and Mexico have a TN visa. This is, if you've heard of the H1B, the E3 is similar to that, except for it is more accessible. And given the numbers, there's 10,000 available for Australia per year, and they only ever get close to using 5,000, maybe 5,500. So it would be the surplus, the extra leftovers of the previous year that Ireland would get. So it would not impact Australia's allotment of 10,000. It would always be from the previous year.
Amazing. It's such a genius approach. Like, for you as an attorney and that group of you to kind of be so resourceful. If they're not being used, why not get them used? Best of luck with it all. We're all obviously so appreciative of that work. And the convention, the Democratic convention, is at the end of August?
It is next week. So it is, the end of August. We are hosting a big so I've joined the Irish Americans for Harris Committee. There's a group of us from all over the US, and even some Americans abroad are working to hopefully elect President Harris. And so we're hosting a couple of events here in Chicago. We're actually honoring my longtime friend and mentor, Billy Lawless, who was an Irish senator. He was the first senator for the diaspora. He was appointed by Enda Kenny, and he has been a long time advocate, has been working on the E3 issue and the Irish undocumented. And he is just an inspiration to me and so many. Lawless at an event here in Chicago, and we have some really big names, members of Congress coming to honor him, and we're very excited about it.
Oh my God, Fiona, that's incredible. And congratulations for being part of this group to elect Kamala Harris. Because I've heard about the convention, and there's I actually got an invite and we can talk about that again, but it sounds like such it's so great to hear, I guess, that there's such a place for you with your knowledge base experience. You're fighting for immigration, for fair immigration, and that you'll have an opportunity to sort of speak with potentially the next administration around that. That's really incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and I actually met Vice President Harris in DC in June. It was just a huge honor, and our kids got to meet her, and she's just incredible. But I have been in a position where I have been advising and talking to the White House and to the USCIS on immigration policy in relation to certain things for startup immigration, O1 visas, because I kind of view my role as an attorney helping on those cases, but also in terms of the bigger picture of immigration, like what can we do to help influence policy and help make a difference on a bigger scale. So I take that duty very seriously, and I do a lot of media, a lot of writing, opinion pieces and speaking, because I do recognize the privileged position that I have a deep level of knowledge and the personal experience of being an immigrant and now a naturalized US citizen. So for me, that's an extra part of my job that I just take very seriously, and I think it's a big honor. So yeah, I love being able to talk about influencing like STEM immigration policies and like some of the good things. Like I got a case approved for a startup founder based on this new program called relatively new program called International Entrepreneur Parole, and getting that approved in what I think is record time. And so being able to share storytell in a way that can help influence how people think about immigration, because there's just a lot of negative talk about immigration that is just not accurate.
That's incredible, Fiona. And like your position as you say, an Irish immigrant in the US, you're a mother, you have helped various people from different parts of the world, and to have that experience and be able to use your platform as give yourself a platform to kind of make real change is just, I have so much admiration for that. And I don't know when you even must sleep because of the list of things that you do. So it's incredible. And I just as well, like as someone who's been living in the US for 10 years, I have formed political opinions. I don't have a vote. I'm not a citizen yet. I think it would be, and obviously to your own discretion, as an attorney, do you see a big change in the level of immigration and the ease of immigration whenever there's a Republican administration versus when there's a Democratic administration? Like, do you feel that on the ground in your role?
Like, absolutely, without a doubt. The Trump administration was so damaging to all different parts of immigration. And I actually have a piece that we're pitching out in an op-ed on this, right? A lot of the big, high-profile, horrendous policies like the Muslim ban, the family separation, like the threats of mass deportation, like a lot of that made the news. But a lot of the business immigration stuff people didn't necessarily hear about. The H-1B, ratings, like denial ratings increasing massively, and getting rid of a policy where we would give discretion to prior approvals and re-adjudicating cases, like obviously all the travel bans and all that kind of stuff. But like there was non-stop stuff that was really, really damaging. And like from an international students' point of view as well, like a lot of student visa denials, and international students are one of the most valuable assets that this country has. Mm-hmm. And it's about time people recognize this. And you hear some people, it drives me mad because you hear, my first piece that I got published was in USA Today during the pandemic, when some Republican senators said that there was no reason that we should let international students get a work permit. And I was fuming. I was like, no reason. I was like, there are a million reasons. And so I sat down and wrote them all out. And I was like, because when you look at the stats, like they actually increase, it increases wages, right? They create jobs, they don't take them away. So, when you actually break down the reality to these random talking points, it just doesn't match up. So I think those of us that are privy to some of these, stats can share them in a way, hopefully with people who maybe, I don't like preaching to the choir. I would rather talk to people who don't necessarily agree with me, and let's share some of these things, and let's really have like an honest conversation about immigration, and let's see what we can accomplish. And that's what I'm hoping we can do. There was a bill that was very close to being passed, but Trump shut it down, and now could have gone a long way to taking steps to fix some of the issues, which there's no doubt there are issues to fix. But yeah, I'm like a fan of actual facts that reflect the honest truth about immigration. So
well said. That's amazing to hear, to sort of get that insight in terms of there was so much going on, I think, during the Trump administration that things could slip through the cracks, and then with COVID and ban, it's really interesting to sort of be moving on from that now and seeing the recovery that is, you can see on the ground as an immigration attorney, and obviously, as you say, much more work to be done. But I am interested now to ask you as well, which I hadn't planned on asking you, what are your thoughts and feelings around immigration into Ireland at the minute? And obviously there's a huge debate there at the minute. And I guess for many of us exiles, we never thought we would see something like this happening, where there is being such a cold, sort of hard separation in opinion and in values of Irish people. And I'm wondering what, do you agree that that's sort of this American influence and this sort of, very hard right-wing, opinions that are becoming really dangerous and damaging and violent? Is that something you're sort of shocked to see as an Irish person whose, job is immigration and you've worn that badge with pride?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would be naive to be shocked by it, given what we have seen, not just in the US, but throughout in Europe as well, right? And I think that it is reflective of some of the stuff that we see here. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that it is by far a tiny minority of people that somehow have the loudest megaphone, right? That's not reflective of the majority of the viewpoints. And this is where it's important for people who don't feel that way to stand up and support people, because Irish people have long been welcomed and long gone to other countries and benefited from emigration. So it's a little bit rich for people now to be talking about that. And also when you start to look again at the facts and the economic statistics of people, who are actually working in Ireland, contributing, all from an economic point of view, immigration is always a positive. So I think it's these tiny minority of people who tend to make the loudest noise, but this is where people who disagree need to stand up for other people. And again, I think we are going to continue to see more of it, but hopefully the pendulum will swing the other way, which I think we're seeing now in the US with, this election season. But again, I think we'll always have those people. And I think there's far more people who are in the centre who maybe are not fully aligned, but I think are open-minded at least to get to a point. I'm eternally optimistic. I think it's a core value of our firm. It's something that I say to people going into immigration. You have to have that as part of your character, because it is it's very easy to just get kind of down about lack of progress and things, but you need to have this will to keep going and to believe that things can be better and to want to take those steps to help make that happen. So, optimistic.
Wow. I love it, Fiona. That's you're just unbelievable. Okay, so we'll jump into some of the listener questions. So O1 visa, just quickly, what are some of the general requirements for somebody to apply for an O1?
This is my baby. I do tons of work on O1s, and also this is my fourth baby now. I do speak on them and stuff, so I could talk about these in my sleep. Your number one resource for O1s is the USCIS policy manual. It has an appendix that goes through the criteria, breaks it down. There's an O1A, there's 8 boxes you can check. The O1B, which is the arts and entertainment, is 6 boxes. And the policy manual gives examples of what you can use as evidence for these. Think about it in a few ways. You want to define your area of expertise. Then think about what is your niche, and is it more in the O1A or is it more in the O1B? It depends on how creative or artistic your job is and what you do on a day-to-day basis. You need a petitioner. My biggest tip is that you can set up a company and that can be your own petitioner. And that is a great way to get things done. And that's a lot what we work with people on, that option. And then you need to show that you're going to continue to work in your field. So it's all interconnected, but it can be an accessible option for people depending on your field. I love these. I have a bunch of videos on TikTok going through all the criteria if people are interested.
Amazing. This is like quick fire. I love it.
I love this. I love the pressure. Bring it on.
Okay, so spouse/partner visas. So say, for example, your partner has gotten this incredible job offer, is being brought over to the US. What happens to the spouse? What happens to whether they're married and if they're not married?
Yeah, great question. And actually, this is one of the questions I talk about in the ebook. So the US immigration system doesn't really recognize non-spouses. Cohabiting partners can generally apply for a long-term B visa if your partner is coming to the US, but it doesn't permit employment. If you're married, there are dependent visa options for for the primary, depending on what the visa is. But again, not all of them allow for employment. So this might be a factor in your analysis in determining whether one option is more suitable than others. If you do have a spouse and they want to work, this is a question you need to ask to your attorney to make sure that that's a factor in your analysis. And it's something that I ask all the time to make sure, because it can tip the scales. Like an O1 doesn't allow a spouse to work independently. But if you're on an O1B, like a content creator, and your spouse is like your manager, they can come as your essential support personnel on a separate visa, an O2. It's not a spouse visa, but it's like your essential support kind of manager. Yes. So just, it's important to bring this up if this is your situation.
Absolutely. Brilliant answer. That brings me to then B visas. So a B visa is essentially a holiday visa, right?
Very reluctant to advise people to apply for the B visa, because if you get denied a B, you're not going to be able to use ESTA to travel. So you need to think long and hard before you apply for a B visa. Why is the ESTA not sufficient? Why is 90 days not good enough? You are setting yourself up for, a situation that might not be what you want.
So when you're going through immigration, say in Dublin Airport, and you have a B visa and that's like 6 months, is it?
Yeah, but you need to get that from the embassy. And in order to get that, you need to prove why an ESTA isn't good enough for you. And that's where you run the risk of them denying you the B visa. And if that gets denied, when you go to apply for an ESTA, most likely your ESTA will get denied.
Oh my God. Okay, that's really valuable information. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so good to know. Then with green card holders, so what is the actual, we hear so many different numbers around this. So when you get your permanent residency card, how long do you have to wait to apply for your citizenship, or is it something that you can start early on?
No, you have to wait. It's 5 years for most people, or 3 years if you're married to and living with the US citizen spouse. And you can apply a couple of months in advance of your anniversary of the 5 or the 3 years, but there is a statutory bylaw period that you need to be a permanent resident for in order to then apply for citizenship.
Okay, perfect. And to apply for a citizenship, do you need an attorney?
Look, it's like anything. You don't know you have an issue until you have an issue. So you should get a screening. We help people with this. There's immigration clinics that can do a screening. I just wouldn't advise anybody to go into one of these things without having assessed. For example, we had somebody who didn't realise, but he had inadvertently registered to vote when he was getting his driver's license. And that is a big no-no. So we caught that. Just make sure that you're getting a legal screening from somebody who knows what they're doing, an attorney or an accredited representative through not a friend who's also done their own citizenship, right? That's not your friend, and that wouldn't be a friend to somebody. Send them to someone who knows what they're doing,
Absolutely. And is it true that because I'm going to be we'll be applying in a couple of years for our citizenship, do you have to have a record of every time you left the country?
You do, because you need to prove that there's numerous requirements to apply for citizenship. One of them is showing that you meet the physical presence requirement. And to do that, you need to be able to document your trips outside the US.
And how long is the physical requirement?
It's normally half of the time period in the if it's the 5 years, you need to normally be physically present in the US for half of that time. Long periods of being gone from the US for a certain chunk can disrupt your whole residency for citizenship. So you need to be careful about that.
Got it. Yeah, we traveled South America and we were advised to make sure that we weren't gone for too long without coming back to the US. And it all makes sense. So if you are a US citizen, so this person is a US citizen but grew up in Ireland, is my now wife entitled to any form of citizenship?
So no one's entitled to anything, I would say. You may be able to apply, but you'd be sponsoring your wife for a green card. And so you'd have to go through that process. And to do that, you need to be domiciled or want to be domiciled in the US. So you would need to show that you're moving back to the US with your wife. And so, that would be a conversation that we would have to talk to you about to see. It's not really something that you just apply for a passport and you have it there for a rainy day. You can't just apply for a passport for any family. For in this situation, you'd get a green card, and then if they meet the eligibility requirements for citizenship down the line, then. But normally, unless you've acquired citizenship, you are applying for a green card first.
Got it. That's really good to know. So if I don't this person said I didn't get picked for the H-1B lottery, but the company want to keep employing me. What are the next best steps?
So I've been having these conversations a lot with people. It depends, right? The $1 million it depends question. Did they say they were on the graduate visa? Is that what they said they were on?
Grad visa, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're unlikely to be able to do a back-to-back J1 without going back home for a time period. You would need to see, there is an option that is pretty novel, I would say. There's a group in New York called the Parachute Project, where they are leveraging a cap exempt H1B option. It's complex, and I won't be able to explain it in sufficient time, but actually that they might be somebody you should talk to, because there's an Irish guy as the executive director there.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's an interesting way of utilizing what's known as a cap exempt visa to then work for like a second employer. I would say, look, it just really depends on your background. I would maybe look at the maybe look at the H1B cap exempt to see if somehow this could work for you. I've looked at E2 visas for people if the company was Irish or if they were going to set up their own company.
E2 visa is, what's that one again?
The investor visa. So it'll only work if you're going to set up a company and make an investment into it. So again, it's not going to work for everybody.
Yeah, but there are, like, that's what I think the positives that can come from if somebody is in a situation where they really want to work here and stay here, that and all of the sort of the knowledge they have is telling them, no, you know, you didn't get the H1B, so you got to go. It is so important to have those conversations with the likes of yourself, Fiona, to see, look, you could go back and do a master's for a year and then come out, or, you know, as well, there's so many, as you say, the investor visa, or if there's a startup, you know, there's all of these other options, right?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to somebody a while ago who had been told, no, came to me, and I was like, we were doing a conversation, you know, having a consult, and I was like, is by any chance is the company a non-profit? Because kind of it's in the sports industry, and I just had a feeling. He's like, yeah, and I was like, okay, are there any, like, do you have any partnerships at any universities? And they're like, yeah, and I was like, the company might actually be cap exempt, and so we're working with them on that, and he'd been working with. So look, it's not to say there's going to be a magic option for you, but you want to know that you're leaving, you know, no stone unturned. And so that's what a good attorney will do. Will be able to really do a holistic review of everything. And again, it may be that, you know, unfortunately there's no immediate option, but feeling that you've really covered everything, I think it is as much as you can do then in that situation.
Brilliant. Well, I guess we are coming toward the end of our time together, Fiona, and this has just been such an education. So thank you so much. I didn't have this, I sort of hadn't even thought about asking you this, and I think it would be a nice one to close with, or maybe an apt one to close with the fact that, you know, there's an election looming, and, you know, there's so many in our network that really work to support, you know, the undocumented, particularly our undocumented Irish here in the US. Is there hope for the undocumented in terms of what, you know, the dreamers, as they've been called by the Obama administration and the Biden administration? Do you think there is ever going to be a path out of being an undocumented person in the US, specifically an Irish person?
I mean, I hope so, yeah. And I think it goes back to the optimism that, you know, I see. I think whatever happens this election is going to be critical in that piece. I think if you survey the American people, the majority of them have been in support of a comprehensive immigration reform. And the reality is that there's about 12 million undocumented immigrants in the US, and the vast majority of them are working and contributing and paying taxes, contrary to some fake things that you'll hear, right? And so most Americans see that as, you know, these are people that we should, you know, give them an opportunity to try to regularize their status, not immediately, right, but pay some kind of fine, as has happened before, you know. And so I think that hopefully with the new election, Congress will just realize that the divisiveness that has kind of been very prevalent for so long needs to end, and we need to really come together that's the only way that the immigration system is going to be modernized truly, is by Congress coming together and passing some updated laws. So I am optimistic, absolutely, and I know that there's a lot of us that have been working, you know, really hard on that issue, and the Irish government have been as well. There's been a real effort there over the years, and a lot of people put in a lot of volunteer time Billy Lawless and all these Irish Immigration Centre, like just tons of people. So I remain always cautiously optimistic. And again, it's not just optimism, it's like people are working to try to make it happen as well. So
brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Fiona. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everything you do for the Irish and for immigrants in general across the US. I'll close by asking you where people can find you online.
So I think we're on every platform imaginable. So we have our firm, which is McEntee Law Group, McEnteeLaw.com. We have all firm social media. And then I have my handle on a lot of platforms is US Visa Lawyer on Instagram. TikTok, it's something else. But anyway, there's a wealth of ways to get in touch with me. And LinkedIn is where you'll find me as well.
Amazing. Well, Fiona, I hope next time you're in New York, we can do a Navigate New York event.
Yes,
you're so fabulous.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sophie. Take care.